Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Shadoe at Night for Monday, January 21st. I've forgotten the date. Monday, January 21st, 2025. A special guest on the show tonight, the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, John Carpay, joins the show tonight. And on the extension for subscribers to ShadoeDavis.com, you Nighthawks, you all-access Nighthawks, Part 4 of the fall of the cabal. Not the original fall of the cabal, but the conclusion to the fall of cabal. Janet Osborne's partner has been working on this series for the past 6 months. She released Part 4 this past weekend, and I am dying to watch Part 4 with you tonight on the extension on ShadoeDavis.com. Also, President Donald Trump down there in the United States today declared war on the deep state and all of the people conspiring against him for the past 10 years, including President Barack Obama. This is going to be a very interesting development, what goes on down there. And I know that many of you are going to be standing up, screaming and shaking your fist. It's a distraction! Shadoe, don't fall for it. It's just a distraction. No, this is what's going on. You know what a distraction was? I'll tell you what a distraction was. That guy, that CEO, getting caught at a baseball game or a football game last week with his mistress on the Jumbotron and blaming it on Coldplay. I think that was the story. That was a distraction. But I found that to be interesting because people on all sides of the political spectrum were able to get together and make fun of it. Some people are saying it was contrived, it was made up. Other people are saying, no, it wasn't. Who wants to get caught with his mistress on the Jumbotron at a baseball game? But one thing I can tell you is don't pay too much attention to that. You know, the beautiful thing about you guys, the viewers of this show, is that you can tell the difference between distractions and what's real and what's meaningful these days. You can pay attention to a distraction as long as it doesn't consume you. And there are people out there who have been consumed by this, researching every different facet and angle of this ridiculous story. It's one of those stories we used to get before COVID-19, 5 or 6 years ago, that people used to go, oh, wow, that's cool. And then radio announcers and late night talk show hosts would be talking about it off and on for a couple of weeks. Speaking of late night talk show hosts, we found out that Stephen Colbert is going to be canceled, but not until next year. And the left is screaming and yelling that it's a political move, and CBS had to pay Donald Trump $16 million because of his lawsuit against 60 Minutes, doctoring the, what's her name again? The one that ran for president. I can't remember her name. That's how relevant she was. I can't remember her name. Doctoring the interview that they did with her, right? So it's not. It's because, according to the New York Post, Stephen Colbert's show, which employs 200 people, was losing between $40 and $50 million every single year. And CBS is trying to sell themselves right now to Skydance, so they can't have any money-losing shows on their network. It wouldn't be a great deal for them, would it? I think Westinghouse is the actual owner of CBS. But anyway, Stephen Colbert's program will cease next year, and all of left-wing Hollywood is crying and moaning all over social media about it, and it's a beautiful sight to behold. Let's go say some hellos. Who's watching tonight? Carla's watching in Calgary tonight. Hello, Sophie. Made for some great memes. Yeah, I gotta give him that CEO and his mistress for sure. Cindy, hello, watching in Toronto on YouTube. Sandra is watching tonight. Gordo is watching on X. Hello, Charlene from Kamloops. Paul is watching tonight. Ruby, how you doing? Does anyone watch that clown? Stephen Colbert you're talking about, I hope. Hello, Cheryl, watching in Alberta. Angela is watching tonight. Nancy, Regina. Who cares? Exactly. Who cares? Kevin is watching tonight in Calgary. Colleen is watching from Madoc on Terrible. Wherever you're watching, whatever platform you're watching on, guys, don't forget to like and share. Get this out to as many people as you possibly can. John Carpay, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, joins the show in 30 seconds. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. And here is the man himself, John Carpay. And John, this is your very first time on the show, so I would like to welcome you to the show. And all of the viewers are writing down some very warm greetings in the comments as well. Thank you for coming on the show tonight. It was short notice. It took me by surprise, to be honest.
Well, so glad to be with you and all of your viewers and listeners.
So, first question I have for you, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has been around since 2010. I was doing the little research I could do on it tonight after realizing that you were coming on the show tonight. So 15 years, congratulations. That's quite a long run that you've had. But what were the constitutional issues that you guys were tackling before, say, 2020?
So we had quite a few campus free speech cases in the beginning. I was the lawyer for some students at the University of Calgary who were getting threatened with expulsion if they continued with their peaceful advocacy of an unpopular viewpoint on campus, that being pro-life. And the general counsel of the university said, you can't, it doesn't matter how peaceful it is, you can't have this on campus. They found the students guilty of non-academic misconduct and did not expel the students, but gave them a warning and said the penalties would just escalate if they did it again. So we sued the university and we got a court ruling against them. And a few years later, we got another court ruling for free speech against the University of Alberta. We represented parents in Hamilton, some very loving foster parents who had a vulnerable 4- and 6-year-old girls. 2 sisters were put in their care. The girls were taken away from these loving foster parents because they refused to tell them that the Easter Bunny is real. I kid you not, and not just a rogue social worker. She was backed up all the way by her superiors. So we ended up suing the Hamilton Children's Aid Society and got a ruling that government bodies cannot discriminate against parents or foster parents on the basis of conscientious belief, because the foster parents thought it would be lying to tell the girls that the Easter Bunny was real.
Yeah, the Easter Bunny case, how does it make it to court? How does something as ridiculous as that actually make it to a courtroom?
Well, I wished the court action could have been started to prevent the girls from getting moved to another home. Unfortunately, when the parents refused to relent, they said, no, we're not going to, we're going to have a chocolate egg hunt, but we're going to say that mom and dad hid the eggs, and we're not going to tell the girls that the Easter Bunny's real. That would be lying. The girls were taken away, and it was after the fact that we sued, and at least we got a court ruling out of it. But it was very sad for the girls and the foster parents.
John, what year was that? Do you recall?
So 2018, I think, was when we got the court ruling. So 2 years before lockdowns.
Yeah, so you got the court ruling in 2018, but what about the case itself? Like, did it take a couple of years to get that ruling?
The case itself was probably around 2016.
Yeah,
it typically takes about 2 years or longer, actually, to get a court ruling, which is one of the problems we have to fix in this country. We need to appoint a lot more judges so that we can get results in weeks and months and not have to count the years as we currently do.
Yeah. It's interesting. The ostrich case went to the Appeals Court of Canada last week. I'm not sure how familiar you are with universal ostrich.
It's the BC where they want to kill all these ostriches.
Yeah, 400 of them, healthy ostriches, after 2 PCR tests that came back positive for H5N1 back in December, and they tested the dead birds and not any of the others. But they're expecting a ruling this week based upon an emergency request from the CFIA, the Food Inspection Agency. How often have you seen something like that happen?
It's pretty rare that you can get something quickly. I mean, we challenged Justin Trudeau's prorogation of Parliament, where in January he declared that, or was it December now? I can't remember. Parliament would be prorogued so that the Liberal Party of Canada could have a leadership race. And we got an expedited hearing, but even there, the hearing took a month. And by the time we got a ruling, the Liberals had picked their new leader, right? So yeah. It's a bad situation. We very much need more judges appointed, because whether your case is a family law or, civil claim, breach of contract, or criminal law, whether you're the accused person or you're a victim of the crime, either way, you shouldn't have to wait for years and years to get a ruling. These rulings should come out in weeks and months.
As a senior attorney in this country, do you think that the appointment process of judges is fair?
Well, it gives.
I know it's a tough one because you're a member of the bar, and it's difficult to make that criticism. But I think that's an honest question, and there's a lot of people who are very dissatisfied with the way our justice system has been going these past few years, and it seems that a lot of judges are making boneheaded decisions that, in the real world, would never be applicable.
It's a winner-takes-all system where the Prime Minister has near absolute power to appoint whomever the Prime Minister wants to appoint. Now, in theory, it's the cabinet and it's the Justice Minister, and I think that the federal cabinet and in particular the federal Justice Minister do play a big role in it. And they have these token judicial appointments committees where they've got somebody from the Canadian Bar Association and somebody from the Law Society of the province, and so on. But fundamentally, it's up to the Prime Minister to appoint whomever the Prime Minister wants, and that's it. That's the bottom line. So if the Prime Minister is somebody who is not really a big fan of the free society and is not really a huge fan of free speech and religious freedom, freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, mobility rights, travel rights, if the Prime Minister is a big believer in big government and government knows best, and citizens should be grateful for whatever morsels of freedom are tossed their way, if that's the attitude of the Prime Minister is very likely to appoint judges with a similar attitude. And so is it fair? Well, probably not. The whole point of having a Charter of Rights and Freedoms is that you would have judges who are above and beyond politics to rein in the politicians when they are trampling on our rights and freedoms. And what we've seen in the years of lockdowns was a lot of judges just wrote the media narrative into their court rulings and just rubber stamped the government's violations of our Charter rights and freedoms with the lockdown measures. So not a good situation right now with the judiciary.
Well, that's all about Section 1, right? Like, this will be allowed in a free and democratic society unless there's an emergency, and all of this judicial notice that's been taking place all across the country for the past few years. I think that the Attorney General and Justice Minister had a lot to do with that. I forget the guy's name. There was a couple during Trudeau's run, but the AG went across the country advising judges or Supreme Court judges and the senior judges in each province to take judicial notice whenever a COVID case came around. And so they were supposed to, and judicial notice is basically saying, well, yes, we acknowledge the grass is green, water is wet, and the vaccines are safe and effective. And
yes.
So anytime somebody tried to argue that these vaccines might be dangerous, that because of the judicial notice, that would immediately be thrown out, correct?
Well, we did have a case in Saskatchewan where Justice Michael McGaugh, who, by the way, was appointed by Harper, not by Trudeau, and he took judicial notice, which you described it, right? It's supposed to be a tool in the judge's toolbox that's reserved for, if somebody comes into court and they're saying gravity is not real or the earth is flat, not round, the judge can say, you know what, I'm not going to spend, 5 days listening to your expert witnesses on this. I take judicial notice of, as you said, water is wet and the grass is green and the earth is round, not flat, etc. But this judge, he abused that. He said that he took judicial notice of the fact that the vaccine is safe and effective for adults and for children. And he knows this is true because the Canada Health Health Canada and the Saskatchewan Health Authority said so. So if the government says it, I believe it, that settles it. It's sort of it was just absolutely obscene. And we saw a lot of the courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, where the Chief Justice issued an announcement that every judge on the bench had been injected with COVID vaccine, which is horrible, because if you, let's say that you got fired from your job because you didn't want to take the vaccine, and let's say you had a medical exemption from a doctor who said the vaccine would be bad for you, or maybe you had a religious exemption, or maybe whatever, but you've got a court case, you're supposed to be going before a court that's impartial. And now the Chief Justice of the court has declared that every judge on the bench has been injected with the COVID vaccine. How can you expect to get a fair hearing and have a fair shot at winning your case?
That's a very interesting point you bring up. I got 2 tickets here in Manitoba. I'm going to say it was 3 years ago. During the rallies when the lockdowns were heavy and all of the regulations would change from one day to the next. You can hug people, you can not hug people, you can have a gathering of 2,000. No, next day you can have a gathering of only 20. You can have 3 people over, no 5 people. You remember that. And I got 2 tickets, 2 weekends in a row for being photographed hugging somebody at a rally, right?
No.
So when I went to court, which was a year later, or more actually, 13 months later, the courtroom is now, all the mandates are gone at this stage of the game, right? And no mask, there's nothing. But the courtroom still had the big plexiglass up, and the judge came out wearing a mask. And I thought, I haven't got a chance here. I represented myself. It was only a couple of tickets, but I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a try. And the second I saw her walk in with this mask on and these plexiglass shields up, I went, I haven't got a chance. Now, what should I have done correctly in that situation, aside from argue the case? Could I have said, I believe that the judge is prejudiced in this case based upon the screens and the mask a year after the mandates have been let down?
Well, certainly the mask, you could say, I want this judge to recuse herself. I think she's biased, and she's showing a bias by wearing a mask. The plexiglass would have been something that was, unless it was her personal request for the courtroom that she would be in, but typically the judges go into, any number of different courtrooms. So that the plexiglass would have been probably instituted there by the court with the approval of the Chief Justice of the court. So that wouldn't be grounds for bias against a specific judge. But certainly the mask, you can ask a judge to recuse, and then the judge herself will rule on that motion. And if she does recuse herself, you probably have to reschedule. Like, you can't, you're not going to get a trial the same day. It's going to be rescheduled to a different date.
Yeah.
But she could rule. She could rule to say, no, I'm not recusing myself. Me wearing a mask is not indicative of any kind of bias. I'm just somebody that, cares about her health.
I suppose you could argue that, because even before all of this nonsense started, and the reason I can say this now is because the other day I saw somebody wearing a mask in their car still. Like the other day, it's 2025. It was 35 degrees that day. I thought she was going to suffocate in that car. But, it's funny because you would see people, the odd person, before all of this nonsense started, wearing a surgical mask in a grocery store or a Walmart or something, but it would be like 1 in a million. And you look at that person and go, what are you, some kind of a nut? Remember when Michael Jackson was wearing the surgical masks for a time? I used to think, what? This guy's crazy, man. Like, it's insane. So you would see that. So I suppose she could argue that I'm just somebody who's trying to watch out for my health and the health of others. But we do know that masks don't do that. How come there have been so many rulings, John, in this country that people have won cases when it comes to mandates, lockdowns, restrictions, vaccines, and all of that, based upon loopholes, but it's never really been tried, at least in Canada. I know it's been happening in the United States, to actually say that, no, these things were not safe and effective now that the judicial notice has been dropped, and that the masks never worked. And there's mountains of evidence to back that up. Years and years of it, as a matter of fact, as opposed to the last 4 years where they were saying, oh, suddenly, all of a sudden, the big 180-degree turnaround, masks did work, right? Like, why doesn't that work in Canada? Like, for real, this is my belief. This is my freedom of thought. This is in the Constitution. I can say I'm not convinced this vaccine is safe and effective. And based on that, I don't want to take it.
Well, partial answer to your question. I wrote a book called Corrupted by Fear. And in Corrupted by Fear, I review some of the rulings. And my thesis is that the judges, like so many other Canadians, got frightened out of their wits. They were terrified out of their minds with the daily, in fact, hourly media propaganda showing scary photographs of dead people, dying people, corpses, coffins, body bags. And you got this, every day, every hour of every day, you get these scary visuals of death and dying people. And that reaches our heart and our gut way before anything can penetrate our minds. And then you had this fear mongering. You had the likes of Neil Ferguson with Imperial College London in the United Kingdom, and he said COVID was going to be like the Spanish flu of 2018. Tens of millions of people are going to die. The truth and the reality is COVID, according to the government's own statistics, if you care to look at them, COVID was a bad annual flu. The death rates in 2020, 21, 22, 23 were in line with the death rates in 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016. You had a very slow, a slow increase. Manitoba in particular, I look at the death rates. COVID had no impact on death rates in Manitoba. So yet when the case, the Gateway case came before Chief Justice Royal in Winnipeg, and he had former Chief Medical Officer Joel Kettner testified and had an expert report that just eviscerated the Manitoba government's lockdowns completely and said, here's what's wrong with PCR testing. PCR testing doesn't diagnose COVID. It just tells you have a trace remnant in your body. It doesn't mean that you're sick or contagious. The World Health Organization changed how we track COVID deaths so that, if you're terminally ill with cancer in a hospice, you're going to die soon. But if they do a PCR test on you and they find a trace of COVID in your body, they classify you as a COVID death. This is what they started doing in April of 2020. The Manitoba government was misleading the people with these so-called case numbers. You probably remember those from the daily news, the hourly news, we got another 1,000 cases of COVID.
Case clicker in the corner of every TV screen, right? Remember that?
Yeah, number of cases. And yet the government, this came out in the trial, the chief, the head of the Winnipeg labs admitted in the trial under cross-examination, he admitted that the Manitoba government was lying to the people. Every time they said there was 1,000 cases, they knew at least 400 of those 1,000 people, at least, and probably 500, 600, 700, but at least 400 of the 1,000 people did not have COVID, were not contagious. So they were lying with the numbers. And so all of this came out. Dr. Joel Kettner, former chief medical officer for the province of Manitoba, expert report, eviscerated lockdowns. How do you think the judge dealt with his expert report?
I think I remember that the judge said, "I'm no scientist," something like that. Or did he too?
Close. That's a different judge in Ontario. I'll get to her in a minute.
Okay.
He completely ignored it. You can read through this big fat, the case is called Gateway. You can find it online. It's probably posted on the website of the Manitoba Court of King's Bench. It's also posted on CANLII, CANLII, Canadian Legal Information Institute. Long ruling. It's the size. It's the size of a short book. It goes on and on and on and on, but nowhere does it mention Joel Kettner's report. The judge completely ignores it, and nowhere does he explain why he prefers the Manitoba government's evidence over the evidence that was brought forward by Gateway Bible Baptist Church and other churches and other individuals. He just says, well, the Manitoba government's evidence, it was better, it was stronger, it was more persuasive. He never explains why he ruled for Manitoba. And so in my book, Corrupted by Fear, I look at these court rulings, and my thesis is that the judges were so terrified by the media fear-mongering that they were not taking a hard look at the evidence that was placed before the court.
The judges were not in their right minds, could you say?
I'm suggesting that, but also admitting up front, I don't truly know. I don't know what's in somebody else's heart or mind, but I'm trying to come up with his explanation, because normally outside of this context of challenging the government's COVID restrictions, normally government judges are extremely careful to disregard what the media is saying, right? If I'm a judge and I've got a murder trial maybe the newspapers are reporting every single day about, this poor little girl got kidnapped and murdered and blah, 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 blah. When the case comes before me, I have to completely disregard all the media that I've heard in the last few weeks, the last few months, the last few years. I have to look only at the evidence presented before me in the courtroom by the Crown and by the accused person. And I have to look only at that evidence, and then I have to come up with a ruling. And what the judges did here, like Joyelle on this Gateway case, he wrote that COVID was unprecedented and it was the worst pandemic in over 100 years. Neither claim was supported by evidence before the court. COVID was not unprecedented. We had the Spanish flu of 1918, which was many, many multiples more deadly than COVID. We had the Asian flu of 1957, which was more deadly than COVID. We had the Hong Kong flu of 1968, which was more deadly than COVID. So he's writing falsehoods into his ruling that are not supported by evidence. Where else is he getting this from, if not from the media?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the remedy for that, if any? Can you just appeal? And this is what they expect you to do. But of course, nobody really has the money for that, right?
Well, if the appeal court judges are just as terrified of COVID from, watching the news all day and seeing all the scary photos of the dead people and the dying people and hearing all these fake, case numbers and hearing these elevated numbers of COVID deaths, right, which is bear no relation to reality. When they hear all of that, my thesis is they're not really looking at the evidence with an open mind. The Gateway case shows it. Anybody who it would take you several hours to read through it. If you read through the case, you will find nowhere does the judge explain why he accepts Manitoba's evidence as more credible, more persuasive than the evidence of citizens. There's zero explanation in the judgment. All it is just repeatedly saying, well, Manitoba's evidence, it's better, it's stronger, it's more persuasive, it's better, it's stronger, it's more persuasive. Never says why or how.
Because it's the government, and I believe that courts are designed to defer to the government in cases like this, right?
In cases like this, but the opposite, you can see the opposite as well. In the province of Alberta, the government came out with a new policy about a year and a half ago saying that children under the age of 16 are not going to be getting puberty blockers and they're not going to be getting opposite sex hormones. The Alberta government based its decision on the lack of scientific certainty and that, the jury is still out as to how beneficial or not these treatments are, how much harm they inflict. Other countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, United Kingdom, on and on and on, they're either moving away from or completely rejecting this notion of giving testosterone to girls, giving estrogen to boys, stopping their normal development. And so there's an LGBT group, Egal Canada, goes into court in Alberta, challenges the Alberta government policy, and the judge rules in favor of the LGBT group. And just a completely different standard from the lockdown standard was, we respect government, because if the science is really complicated, who am I to disagree with this very, contested, muddled science? Who am I to disagree with the government? I have to defer to the government to let government do what's best. But then on LGBTQ stuff, Danielle Smith's government, according to this judge, does not know what's best for kids. Yeah. And so interim ruling was in favor of Egal Canada.
So are we suggesting then that many of our institutions are corrupted by the woke mind virus, as Elon Musk calls it?
I would say yes. When you look at the prosecutions in Winnipeg, you probably remember July 1st, 2021, some people commit a crime in broad daylight by vandalizing and tearing down a statue of Queen Victoria at the legislature grounds.
Yes.
There's abundant evidence. How many, videotapes do they have of the different people? The police do nothing, and the Manitoba Crown announces that they're not going to prosecute any of these individuals. This is a crime. The only property you can legally destroy is your own property. That's legal. You cannot destroy somebody else's property, and you cannot destroy public property. And so you have a crime committed in broad daylight with the vandalism of the statue of Queen Victoria, who happened to be the Queen when these treaties were signed and the Aboriginal residential schools policy was first got off the ground.
She was a colonizer, John. She was a colonizer.
She's a colonizer. So there's no prosecution there. Why? Because it's politically correct. The Regina chief of police attended a Black Lives Matter rally in blatant violation of the existing health orders that were in force at the time, where it was illegal to gather publicly with more than, I don't know if it's 5 people, 10 people, 20 people. They had hundreds of people at this rally. Chief of police is present, speaks at the rally, and yet the Crown in Saskatchewan has very aggressively prosecuted dozens of people, probably hundreds of people who violated health orders, but not on the pretext of fighting racism.
What about that judge in Ontario that said, "I'm not a scientist," in court? I'd like to hear that story.
Yeah, that's Renee Pomerantz. I talk about her as well in Corrupted by Fear. So the case was Trinity Bible Chapel, and like many of the COVID cases, it featured extensive evidence. There was expert evidence. There were scientists who came in and said, argued the citizens' viewpoint that COVID is not as deadly as the media makes it out to be. These measures are not helpful for reducing the spread of COVID. These lockdowns are causing more harm than good, et cetera, right? So we had our experts, the government had their experts. And the judge said, "I am neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies regarding COVID-19. And I read that and I thought, wow, like if I had said that about the same judge 3 years earlier in 2019, if I had said Justice Renee Pomerantz is neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies in court cases that come before her, I would have had a threatening letter from the Law Society telling me that I was engaging in a vitriolic, over-the-top, unacceptable public criticism of a judge, inappropriate criticism of a judge. The Law Society would have been after me. And here she says it about herself in a court ruling. And it's outrageous because this very same judge in criminal cases, in medical malpractice suits, in contract cases, she's been resolving scientific controversies in the courtroom every day for years. And now it's COVID. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I just can't resolve scientific controversies. And therefore I just rule in favor of the government. The government can do whatever it wants if the government says that it's a crisis. And we know it's a crisis because the media said so. I'm paraphrasing. She didn't say these words in her ruling, but you can see she's very fear-filled, fear-driven judge who is just going to defer to the government because, she believes that COVID is this something like, the Spanish flu of 1918.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. So now that we've got all of this new evidence regarding everything that you've said in the past half hour or so, that COVID was not nearly as dangerous as the media was making it out to be, and certain doctors and certain scientists, not just in Canada, but worldwide. Not to mention, maybe now the judges have had a little bit more time to pull their heads out of their asses and get rid of some of that fear so that they could make a more rational and balanced decision. Do you think it would be worthwhile to maybe go back and try again in some way? I'm sure somebody could, like vaccine injuries, for example. There's so many people out there I'm having a whole bunch of vaccine injured folks on the show tomorrow night. And I'm wondering if there's a way to go and get them some kind of support in court.
Yeah. Well, the Justice Center is not involved in these lawsuits for damages. We try to focus on the constitutional issues and get a court ruling that a government policy is an unjustified violation of one or more of the freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly, and so on. But I do wish those court actions well. I hope that they succeed, and I think they would have a better chance of succeeding, I would think, than some of our court actions that we launched in 2020, 2021, in the middle of all this media propaganda with a false narrative that COVID is making COVID out to be far, far worse than what it actually was. Right now, if you're doing the vaccine litigation, you don't have this media narrative influencing judges the way that you would have 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, but we did win in the Hillier case in Ontario. The Ontario Court of Appeal ruled that struck down as an unjustified violation of the freedom of peaceful assembly an Ontario government ruling where it was illegal for even two people to gather together outside. They could for prayer, but not for a political protest. It was illegal for two people or five people, whatever, to be outside together for a peaceful political protest.
Yeah.
And so the Ontario Court of Appeal actually said that that was an unjustified violation, and the government had not proven its case in court. So we did get, we did get a favorable ruling in that. Not coincidentally, that's a ruling that came out in April. I think it was April of 2025. So 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, I had Randy on talking about that, and he said, because I said, well, wasn't there still like this horrible, deadly virus out there? And he said, yeah, but this was, as he put it, it was a blanket ban on meeting, as you just pointed out, and it wasn't selective, right? It wasn't like, well, you can have 20 people, but not 30, and so on and so on. So that's how I think a lot of the provinces got away with these mandates. By the way, one of the big questions during all of this nonsense in the past few years, and people still debate it today, is there a difference between a law and a mandate in terms of enforceability?
No. The government, you mentioned in your intro about Trump taking on the deep state. One feature of the deep state, it's not a word I use very often, but there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of regulations in Canada. If you add up all the provincial regulations for 10 provinces and federal, everything from, how a barber shop, how big is the sink supposed to be that you get your hair rinsed in, and everything to do with cars, transportation, and food safety, and medicine, and health, and drugs, and on and on and on and on. And those regulations all have the same force of law as a piece of legislation that was actually voted on by the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba or the federal parliament. But we've developed this deep state whereby the MPs or provincially the MLAs, they will vote on a bill, and the bill will say A, B, C, D, and it'll have various provisions. And they look at the provisions, hopefully, and debate them. And so you've got the assent of the people. The people's representatives will vote it into law. Almost every bill says the lieutenant governor in council may make regulations regarding whatever. And now you've got the power given to the provincial cabinet to make regulations which have the same force of law as a law that's voted on by the MLAs. But the provincial cabinet can say, for some transportation safety, they can say, well, we're going to extend this to apply to trucks that have 6 wheels and not just trucks that have 18 wheels, whatever. They can change all these regulations without any public scrutiny or public accountability. And that is a challenge that we face because they do have the same force of law as the legislation passed in the Legislative Assembly.
I didn't realize, I didn't realize that provinces had the ability to do orders in council like the federal government does. That's fascinating. Yes. I want to talk about human rights for a moment here, because Manitoba has instituted in these past couple of months a new code in the Human Rights Code, whereas if you misgender somebody and it's intentional, you could receive a $20,000 fine and maybe time in jail. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But you've got a case here that we talked about before we went on the air tonight about a nurse filing complaints. I would imagine this is a human rights complaint against Vancouver Coastal Health and BC College of Nurses and Midwives for political discrimination. Interesting. Political discrimination. So she said certain things regarding the LGBTQ community online on her own personal social media pages, I'm assuming here, and Vancouver Coastal Health didn't like that too much, so they had to fire her. What's the story there?
Well, she was prosecuted by so Amy Ham is a nurse in British Columbia. She stated publicly on Twitter that there are only two genders and that women are entitled to safe spaces like their bathrooms, change rooms, women's sporting competitions, female prisons, rape crisis counseling session. Anyway, women are entitled to their own safe spaces where biological males may not enter. She said that publicly. She said there's only two genders. There was never any patient that complained against Amy Ham over having been treated poorly by her in any way, shape, or form. She had a spotless record. So there were 4 years of disciplinary proceedings against Amy Ham. The Justice Center paid for and funded her legal representation. She was found guilty of professional misconduct because she stated publicly that there's only two genders, and she identified herself as a registered nurse in making those public statements. So just an obscene ruling. We spent, I don't know how much it was, 20,000, 10,000 to get an expert witness in at this hearing to explain that there are only two genders, because this needs to be proven now. You need to have experts to try to prove that point. Anyway. After the college ruled that she was guilty of professional misconduct, right? This is her regulatory body, the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. After she was found guilty of professional misconduct over what she said on Twitter, then her employer, Vancouver Coastal Health, fired her. And so now one of the remedies, Amy Ham and her lawyers are looking at different, legal avenues, but one of them is to file the human rights complaint to say that the Vancouver Coastal Health is violating her human rights by discriminating against her on the basis of her belief and political opinion, which to my knowledge is a protected ground of discrimination in British Columbia. So you cannot discriminate against another person based on their political belief. Not every province has that ground of discrimination. I don't know if Manitoba does or not. So
I don't know either. What are the most difficult? You've argued cases all across the country, or different lawyers in the JCCF. What are the most difficult provinces to get a win in, do you think?
Each province. I couldn't tell you offhand.
Depends on the judge, I guess, eh?
Depends on the judge. It depends on the issue. I know our litigation director told me that when it comes to prosecuting COVID tickets, he says Saskatchewan was the worst province in Canada. They were very, very aggressive, which is kind of weird because Saskatchewan was the first province in Canada to get rid of lockdowns, and you had a non-NDP government there that was, mind you, NDP, non-NDP didn't make much of a difference during lockdowns, but so no, we win cases, we lose cases all over the place, and I couldn't tell you which province is better or worse.
Getting back to Amy Ham for a second, is she still in the middle of litigation, or is her case settled now and ruled on?
She's just filed recently the human rights complaints, and she is unemployed. Very courageous woman. What saddens me the most is if there had been 1,000 other nurses in British Columbia that had gone on Twitter and said, "I stand with Amy. There are only two genders. I am a registered nurse in British Columbia." If you had 1,000 nurses do that, which wouldn't be that hard, because I don't know how many nurses they have, but they have thousands and thousands of nurses. And I'm sure that more than half of the nurses, I bet you 70%, 80%, 90% of the nurses in British Columbia agree with Amy Ham. There are only two genders. Women are entitled to safe spaces. And yet, to my knowledge, it would have clogged up. It would have shut down the college. How could they start prosecuting 1,000 nurses who all went on Twitter to say, we stand with Amy Ham? And, this is how freedom dies in Canada. It's by people not wanting to do the hard and uncomfortable thing. Not practicing the virtue of courage.
This is a question that I was going to ask you, because I've asked a lot of people this, and I've had this question asked of me so often that I just don't know how to answer it anymore. What's it going to take to wake Canadians up and make them understand what exactly is happening and the consequences of all this down the road?
Well, something about human nature tends to make most people quite short-sighted. And so people don't people tend to get very animated when it's they themselves, like when it's my freedom of speech, or when it's my paycheck, or when it's me getting fired, or when it's me that can't leave the country, right? People, human nature has always been that way. And I think we've had a cultural decline in the last 40, 50 years where you don't have that same appreciation for the free society that we would have had. Let's say in 1945, we had just fought a war, and a lot of Canadians gave their lives to fight against fascist Italy and Imperial Japan and National Socialist Germany. And after that, we had decades of the Soviet Union, which had zero respect for free speech, religious freedom, parental rights, property rights, what have you. So it was kind of stark, and it was pretty clear to most Canadians that we have a free society and it's worth fighting for, it's worth defending. And then, we won World War II. And then in 1991, the Soviet Empire came crumbling down. So that's been, 35 years of just kind of having it easy, having it
We've got it too good. We've got it too good. Yeah.
And now you get this point where when lockdowns were imposed 5 years ago, a lot of Canadians were, make it illegal for me to have Christmas dinner with my own parents. Make it illegal for me to play in team sports, to hang out with friends at the pub. Make it illegal for me to travel. Make it illegal for me to attend my grandfather's funeral. Make it illegal for me to hold the hand of a dying parent. And let's torture all these poorer seniors in long-term care facilities and lock them up in isolation for months on end to save them from COVID. Just this whole madness. There were so many people who supported this that it was really disappointing to see that lack of love for our fundamental human rights and constitutional freedoms.
But they turn it around on us, and they claim that we're the grandma killers. We're the ones without compassion. We're the ones trying to save people by keeping them locked up in their homes and not letting them see their dying parents, as you point out, or their relatives for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter. And that's the diabolical part of it, or one of the diabolical parts of it that I've found. One of the other things is we're noticing a lot of municipal councils across the country try tactics like banning recording of their public meetings. And this happened in Manitoba, and it's also happened in Nanaimo, I believe you were talking about before we went live tonight. And you guys are involved in those cases, correct?
Yes, absolutely. The Nanaimo situation, the city of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, they passed a bylaw that no citizen can video record or audio record public proceedings at city council. Just outrageous. They went a step further. A second bylaw makes it illegal to photograph or videotape in public parks. So without prior approval from the city. So I guess if you want to...
You have to have a license to take a picture of your family in a public park? Like, is it possible that a police officer would actually come over and arrest a guy taking a picture of his wife and kids in a public park?
Well, under this new bylaw, you could get a ticket for doing that. And the mayor justifies this. We got to keep everybody safe from pedophiles. Like, there's all these pedophiles lurking around parks taking photographs. So therefore, it's illegal to take photos in a park, which is a complete overstretch. You've got the privacy legislation in BC, and you've got criminal harassment, criminal intimidation, and so on. So there are ways, okay, if there's some shady, undesirable character that is, got the camera lens fixated on your kid and is just repeatedly taking photos of your kid, you can call the police. There's ways of dealing with that. We don't need a bylaw that makes it illegal for every citizen to take photos and videotapes in a city park. So if the city doesn't back down, we will do what we've already done in Springfield, Manitoba, where we have filed a court action because the rural municipality of Springfield also passed a bylaw that there's no video or audio recordings of city council meetings. And so our lawyers have filed a court action against that. And
this is going to be precedent setting, John, because if they win, then all of these Marxist-style municipal councils across the country are going to impose these same laws. I mean, it's already bad enough in certain areas. I'm sure you're familiar with the situation that Councillor Lisa Robinson at Pickering faces, and there's a few others in Alberta and British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Ontario that I've spoken with as well. But they seem to be the minority on their council, and every time they try to ask a question, they get shut down, their pay gets docked, and they become censored. So they're not even allowed to ask any questions anymore. I mean, what is going on exactly here?
Well, one of my favorite sayings is that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We've had way too much apathy for school board elections. People say, a school board election, can't be bothered to vote. Voting turnout for school board elections, depending on which city, is 10%, 15%, maybe 20%.
Yep.
But it's very low. And then municipal elections, you have this very low turnout. So you get some people that really are hostile to the free society. They don't respect freedom of speech at all. They feel entitled to silence anybody who disagrees with them. They don't respect freedom of association. They don't respect the private property of citizens, etc. They don't respect the free society, and they get into positions of authority, and then they use that authority to advance their agenda. And Canadians who love freedom need to let go of this victim mentality. We're these victims of this horrible school board that's pushing, transgender ideology on kids. And we're the victims of this horrible city council that's doing horrible things. It's like, well, no, roll up your sleeves, get involved in the democratic process, run for school board, run municipally. And if the first time you lose, you fall flat on your face, well, pick yourself back up and go at it again. Because the second time that you run, you will have all this experience that you've acquired on knowing what to do and what not to do. And
the connections
we don't have
well.
to be victims.
Yeah, we do. You make all kinds of connections the first time you try anything, and the next thing, next time you run, you're going to have probably a team of volunteers, 3 or 4, 5 times bigger. We have to talk about Chris and Tamara. They're going to be going through their sentencing hearing this week. And I've just asked people on social media just a few hours ago. I said, if you have a picture with Chris and Tamara or Big Red or both of them together and yourself, please post that as your profile pic. I know that judges are not supposed to be influenced by the citizens of a country, but they are only human. And, I think that if they hear enough, John, I'm hearing even from people on the left that this 7-year ask the Crown wants for Tamara and 8 years for Chris is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, why would they do such a thing on such short notice? They only sent this out on Friday. I think Tamara posted that.
I think the entire prosecution has been a misuse of resources. In the province of Ontario, there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of people who stood accused of murder, rape, violent assault or aggravated assault, serious crimes. And they were not brought to trial because the Supreme Court says for serious crimes, they have to be tried within 30 months. And the Crown said that the Crown prosecutors in Ontario have stated publicly, we have to let these accused murderers and accused rapists walk away scot-free without a trial because we just don't have the resources to bring these matters to trial. And yet they've got resources to go after a Chris Barber and a Tamara Leach. I mean, there was something, I forget the number, 35 days. Don't quote me on that. I've forgotten the number, but it was many, many weeks of trial. And it cost the Crown, I don't know how much it cost, but it was a huge amount of resources put into getting a conviction for mischief, which ordinarily, if you vandalize somebody's car or if you physically obstruct somebody from, if you're walking down the sidewalk, I physically obstruct you, that's obstruction. It's criminal code offense. You don't even get jail time for mischief typically. And so it's a really poor use of resources in the first place.
In your opinion, your legal opinion, did they commit mischief?
The truth is I have not I'm embarrassed to say this, but I answer the questions truthfully. I have not read the lengthy trial judgment. So if there were, and I anticipate the decision is going to be appealed in any event, but you can't appeal ahead of the sentence. So sentence has to be imposed first, and then whatever that sentence is, and then you appeal the underlying ruling for being unreasonable.
So, and this is something that surprised me as well. It's a sentencing hearing now this week. So they're both, Chris is going to be attending via Zoom and Tamara is going to be there in person. So it's going to be a 2.5 days in court for this sentencing hearing. And then we're only going to get the sentencing in August, 2 to 3 weeks down the road. Is that an odd thing, or is that something that happens frequently?
That happens frequently.
Okay.
If it's a half-day trial or a 1-day trial on impaired driving or shoplifting, I mean, quite often the judge, even on impaired driving, the judge will usually reserve and then write a decision, and then there's submissions on sentence. For shoplifting conviction or impaired driving conviction, you'll often get the judge handing down a ruling the same day, saying it's going to be whatever. Mm-hmm. Here, because it's such a high-profile court case, and it would be quite normal for the judge to listen, after having listened to Crown and defense, to say that she's going to reserve judgment and release a ruling in August. I'd be surprised if it came down on Friday.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the judge, Heather Perkins McVeigh? Do you know anything about her?
Well, it was interesting that she did allow a lot of the Crown's evidence in that, another judge could have ruled to be irrelevant. And the conventional thinking at the time, and again, nobody knows for sure what's going on inside the judge's mind or the judge's heart, was that she wanted to put in allow the Crown to have its way and put in as much evidence as possible so that there wouldn't be complaints after the fact. So that if she acquitted, then there wouldn't be complaints from the Crown saying, well, you would have convicted if you'd had more evidence come in. But she seemed to be not too thrilled with some of the Crown's evidence. It just went on and on and on about the protest in Ottawa.
Yeah, and I would imagine she's not going to be thrilled with the Crown now seeking, instead of 2 years, which is what we all thought it was going to be up until last Friday. Now they're asking for 7 and 8 years. I mean, the judges have got limits. Have you ever seen a judge dress down an attorney at any point in your career, like where the attorney's doing something absolutely ridiculous and the judge finally says that's enough, or is that strictly in movies and television shows?
No, it does happen in real life as well. I'm not sure if it really changes a lot. You can up your ask, but it's if you were selling an item on Amazon for $100 and then you shifted the price and tried to sell it for $700 instead, at the end of the day, it's going to sell for what it's going to sell for. And whether you up the price last minute or not, I don't think. So by way of analogy, I don't think it'll have a big impact. So yeah, it's interesting what's going on here. Typically you don't do this last minute. You think about it carefully and you come up with one position, and the Crown's always asking for more than the defense, but the Crown will think about it and will advance a particular position that it should be life imprisonment or 10 years or 5 years or whatever. And defense, you typically don't change it last minute.
Why are they so adamant, John? Why are they so adamant that they want to get this? Is obviously a show pony trial. And what is their motivation behind all of this? And more importantly, is it the attorney in charge of the case, the Crown attorney in charge of the case, do you think, who's making this decision, or is this coming right from the top?
I don't know, and nobody really knows for sure. What is certain is that Tamara Leach rubbed an awful lot of people the wrong way. And of course, myself, I'm a fan and admirer of Tamara Leach. I mean, other people see her I think appropriately and justifiably as a hero for taking the leadership position, having suffered an enormous amount. I mean, 49 days in jail, just horrific. You know, there's people that are accused of very serious crimes that are walking away. They get fingerprinted and they're out on bail. You know, she had to spend so much time in jail, 49 days in total. So she's a real Canadian hero. I think the whole issue of the lockdowns and the vaccine passports was very divisive. Right. Of course, it should have been divisive. I mean, these were measures that took away our rights and freedoms. And, some Canadians thought they were good and others thought they were bad. So I think Tamara Leach, probably in the minds and more so in the hearts of these Crown prosecutors and the legal establishment, she is this vile person who represents, the non-compliance with lockdowns, and she represents. I think they see her as really evil because these issues are so divisive.
That's interesting that you say. I wonder. To me, it's like there is no rational and logical-minded person, if you take emotion out of it, that could actually think that. We're talking about the very freedom that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is supposed to provide. And that document, that living document in our Constitution, is supposed to exist for moments such as that. That's what it's there for. And when somebody decided to stand up for their rights and the rights of Canadians coast to coast to coast, the government said nope, and they're still saying it. What about Chris Barber? They want to take away his truck. They want to take Big Red away. This is his means of income because it's a symbol, right?
It's a symbol. I mean, if Chris Barber was a dark-skinned Aboriginal Muslim lesbian who had devoted his life to trying to control the climate and had gone to Ottawa and caused some inconvenience to people, and I think it's fair to say, I don't think anybody seriously disputes that there was some measure of inconvenience imposed on some Ottawa residents. There was debate about how much, but I mean, there was inconvenience there. At the same time, lots of people testified they could walk through downtown from point A to point B. You could walk everywhere through downtown without getting obstructed, but it was busy. It was crowded. Police told the trucks where to park. But there's no doubt in my mind, if Chris Barber was a dark-skinned Aboriginal Muslim lesbian who had devoted his life to trying to control the climate and had done a similar protest in Ottawa that caused an equal amount of inconvenience, they would not be after him. The legal establishment would not be prosecuting him. But he is the wrong gender, the wrong sexual orientation, the wrong skin color, and worst of all, he's the wrong politics. He did not get with the program. He was not a good Canadian that put on their mask and obeyed these utterly unscientific measures and got themselves injected. He's one of the bad guys. So can I prove that? No. Can somebody else disprove it? No. I mean, this is speculation, but we do see hard evidence when you look at the Manitoba Crown prosecutors not going after those vandals who destroyed or at least vandalized a statue of Queen Victoria in broad daylight. They were not prosecuted. That's political if you want evidence.
Two-tier.
And the Regina Chief of Police.
Yeah. Two-tier system.
It's a two-tiered system.
Yeah.
Evidence
John,
that exists.
We could go on all night, man. I'd love to have you back if you're willing to come back and have another discussion or continue this one. You're a great guy to have on, a great guy to talk to, but very knowledgeable. And how can I find your book, by the way? How can we all go looking for your book?
So Corrupted by Fear, it's on Amazon. So just go amazon.ca, Carpay, Carpay. Corrupt. Well, it's my only book, so
so we don't have to go looking through a mountain
Corrupted
of books.
by Fear, and it's $25. It's available in audiobook as well if you want to listen to it while you're going for a walk or gardening or going to the gym, whatever. The audiobook is available. There's a Kindle version, and then there's a regular paperback, and it's $25. and it's a bestseller on Amazon.
Excellent.
For Canadian books.
I'm going to go pick that up. John, thank you very much for joining the show tonight. Please come back. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you again. Thanks for having me on your show.
Okay, thank you. There is John Carpay, the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. So tomorrow night, guys, we have more guests coming on, vaccine injured, and they're going to tell their stories. And then on Thursday night, we had the author of this book, who was recently in Winnipeg, and I had the pleasure of having lunch with him on Saturday afternoon at the Hotel Fort Garry downtown, where I literally bumped into John Travolta, who is in the city filming a movie or something. I didn't know it at the time, but I found out later on. So our guest on Thursday night, who is in Ottawa now and will be covering the sentencing hearings of Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, is Ray McInnes. He is the author of this book called Unjustified. So that's Thursday night. Tomorrow night, vaccine injuries. And we're going to try and get Chris Carbert on the show Wednesday night. So it's kind of packed. That's it for the show tonight, you guys, the social media part of it. But the extension is in about 2 minutes. And tonight, I'm very happy to say, we have part 4 of the conclusion of The Fall of the Cabal. Now, I watched it earlier this afternoon, and I have to say to you right now that there's a lot in this 38 minutes. A lot. And it's all about Freemasonry and where it began and how it's showing itself today. It's part 4 of the conclusion of The Fall of the Cabal tonight for you. All access Nighthawks at ShadowDavis.com. If you're not a member, please consider becoming one. I'm putting a merch store onto the website this coming weekend, so you'll be able to buy Shadow at Night hoodies and mugs and hats and whatever else I can conjure up. So hopefully you'll decide to support the show and become an all-access member at ShadowDavis.com. That's ShadowDavis.com. The extension begins in 2 minutes for the rest of you. I love you all. I appreciate you all. Thanks again to John Carpay from the JCCF, and I'll catch you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Central. Bye for now.